known as a 484 because of the wheel configuration. 4 pilot wheels, 8 driver wheels, 4 wheels under the cab. It's a northern type engine. It's one of the biggest steam engines ever made in the United States. There's one that's a little bit bigger. It's up in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and it's the big boy. And the big boy is about 18 foot longer than ours. It has an articulated frame, so it can do this going around curves because it's hinged in the middle of the frame. Ours is all one piece. The frame is all one piece. So that makes it also very unusual. Now, the Santa Fe Railroad, 1944, the World War II is going on. They thought they would try out these new diesel engines. They wanted to get some diesel. Well, diesel fuel was in heavy demand for the war. So they told them, no, you better get steam engines. You're going to have to wait on the diesel engines. Santa Fe said, okay, we want 30 of them. 30 of these giant engines. And that's what they did. They built 30 of them. When Santa Fe got them, they were all in pieces. They shipped them out from Philadelphia in pieces. And when they got to Topeka, they put them all together and sent them out on their assignments. This engine, in its very first year, 1944, it ran from Kansas City, pulling freight trains, Kansas City up here to La Junta, Colorado, which is up in the southeast corner. That's where the Santa Fe tracks switched. You had your south track coming down here, and you had your west track that went to Pueblo. So it would go to there, and then it would go down to Clovis, which is a town in the eastern edge of New Mexico. That's where it first ran. Well, in 1945, the next year, the war ends. So they said, oh man, we need all the engines out in California to pull troop trains. So our big girl here got reassigned. She got sent out to Los Angeles, and she ran troop trains from LA to Albuquerque to Kansas City. And the engine would pull 15 to 30 cars of coaches full of troops with no problem whatsoever. They found out it was pretty fast. So when the war was over, they put this engine on their famous passenger trains, such as the Chief, the El Capitan, the Grand Canyon, the Scout. Those are the passenger trains that we know that it pulled. And it did a very good job. But then in the 50s, the diesel engines finally started to take over. Santa Fe was able to get the diesel engines, and they got those beautiful, what's called as the war bonnets. They were red, silver, with a yellow stripe. They were considered the most beautiful diesel engines in the United States. And they put those on their passenger trains. So our big girl here went back to freight service. And then as that waned and more diesel engines were used to pull the trains, it got sent into pusher service. So it was down here in Belen, which is about 30 miles south. There was an Abo Canyon that's about, 6-7 miles long, Abo Canyon, up to Mountain Air, and it would help push the trains up through the canyon. And then in December 31st, 1955, it made its final run. It pulled some boxcars and some freight up here to Albuquerque, and they shut it down, and they put it in temporary storage. And it sat there for a while, and then in 1956, it went to the park. So it went to Coronado Park, and it looked really nice, but by the time our organization got it, it looked like a big pile of rusty junk. They didn't keep it, the city didn't keep it up. So I'll show you a picture of that after we get done looking at the engine. All right, here in the front, notice the bell. That bell's pretty heavy. It's an original bell, and we think that when it was in the park, maybe somebody tried to take it, because there's some pry marks up there on the brackets. But they didn't get anywhere with it because it weighs over 200 pounds. They couldn't pick it up. Now the headlight had to be replaced. That was all smashed. It's a weird headlight. It's 32 volts, 500 watts. So they looked to collectors to see if they could find a replacement headlight. Sure enough, they did find one, and they purchased it through eBay. Yeah. On the front corners of the engine are air compressors, 2 giant air compressors. Each one of them weighs about a ton. And you're actually seeing one of them today because they took the shrouding off. So the one here on the fireman's side is exposed. And the reason they took the shrouding off is they're gonna lift it off of there and they're gonna rebuild it. They already did the one on the engineer side. They've already replaced it. Those air compressors are very, very, very important because on a steam engine, everything is either powered by air or steam. There wasn't hardly anything that was electric back in 1944 on a steam engine. So that's why we had two great big air compressors. Now, the 2926 number, that's not original. We made that here in our shops. We have a metallurgy shop over here where they can pour all kinds of metal things, and they made those numbers for it. Okay, so we're going to go down the fireman's side of the engine. Watch your step here. How a steam engine works. You got your firebox up front. Water jackets over the firebox. Water heats up, makes steam. Steam goes back and forth through the tubes, gets hotter and hotter and hotter. And the hotter it gets, the more power it has. Okay? And eventually, the wet steam turns into dry steam. And the dry steam is 700 degrees. And it passes down through here. So when the engineer opens the throttle, there's a slide bar that moves, and it exposes these holes for the steam to pass through. So as the engineer pulls the throttle open, more and more steam goes down into a slider right in here. Now this slider will shoot steam here and push this cylinder this way. Then the slider will move over here, shoot steam this way, and the thing will go this way. The cylinder will go this way. Now, just imagine that 100 times faster. Okay, back and forth, back and forth. Notice what it's connected to. A big bar. Step on up here a little bit. See what it's connected to? This big rod, which connects to the drive rods, which connects to the wheels. And that's how the steam power gets down to the wheels. It goes down through the front. So if that cylinder blows out, whoop, it's all over. She's going to come to a real quick stop. Okay, and this here slides back and forth. Okay, and that's why we have these little oilers here. They make sure that this always gets oil. These wheels in the front, these little wheels, are the pilot wheels. They have a little bit of play to them. So when the train approaches a curve, they kind of guide the engine into the curve. But those wheels under the cab don't do that. They're very stationary. They don't have that play. So they found out the hard way that steam engines should not back up real fast. They have a tendency to derail. They found that out in Iowa after having two really serious crashes back in the 1800s. They found out, don't run those steam engines backwards. So turn them around. So if you think about any old movie or TV show you've ever seen with steam engines, they're always pointed forward. You don't see them roaring down the track backwards. If you do, something's really wrong there. Okay, now, when you have this much heat in your boiler, you don't want to throw ice cold water in there, because if in wintertime, that water in the tender might be really cold. So they had a preheater. This is the Worthington water heater, and it preheated some of the water that went into the boiler so it didn't shock the system. All right, moving on down here, I want you to behold the driver wheels. They're taller than me. The driver wheels are over 80 inches tall. And they weigh tons. Come on down a little bit more. See, there's 8 driver wheels. These driver wheels are pretty interesting. Now, there's an axle that goes to the other side, so it's connected to the wheel on the other side. That's why they weigh so much. All right. Now, this has to be off-center in order to turn the wheel. Obviously, if it's in the middle, it wouldn't do nothing. So it has to be off-center to turn the wheel. Okay. Well, being off-center puts the wheels out of balance. So that's what these big giant things are here. These are wheel weights. Just like when you get your tires balanced on your car, well, this is the giant version. Okay, notice also the giant brakes. Brake shoes are right here, about that big. The original ones were all cracked and busted. They weren't any good. So we had to order, we went to Napa. Well, they didn't have any. So we had to special order them. $10,000 for new brake shoes. And we just want to mention also that we run all on donation money. So we had to fix the engine as we got the money. Now this engine cost $252,000 brand new. And because of the war effort, they built it in 91 days. Guess how long it took us to fix it up? 23 years. And we've spent $4 million fixing it up. Another little thing I want to point out to you, because you can see it real good right here, are these tubes. There's a little tube that comes down in front of each one of these big driver wheels, but there's one on this back wheel that's behind. Those are sander tubes. Up on top, it's hard to see when you're so close, but up on top there's a dome. That's the sand dome. It has 3 tons of sand in it. Now, before the engineer takes off from a stop, he hits the sander control. And a little bit of sand, air-powered, shoots down in front of the wheel, and it gives it traction so that the wheel doesn't spin or slip. Now, you might have seen some old cowboy movies or old Western movies where the old train pulls into the station and the engineer and the fireman jump out with their oil can, and then when they take off from the station the wheels go boom, and they kind of do that little spin, and that's kind of Hollywood is what that is. We don't really want that to happen because that really tears up the tracks. Now you may not know it, but these wheels have tires, and there's the tire right there. It's a ring that goes all the way around. No, it's not rubber, it's metal. And they found out that it was cheaper when you got 1.1 million miles on an engine, the wheels are going to wear down. So it was cheaper to change the tire than it was the whole wheel mechanism. You had to take these bars off here. Then they would light the wheel on fire. The tire would heat up and they would knock it off. Then they take the brand new tire and they would light it on fire and heat it up and then pop it on, and as it cooled, it tightened. So there's no bolts that hold those tires on. They're held on by the contraction, cooling of the metal. And I found the work history for this engine. They put on brand new tires at 450,000 miles. Don't you wish you could get that many miles out of your car tires? Yeah. How about your car? Well, anyway, 450,000 miles. They put on new tires. At 730,000 miles, I think they knew that the days of the steam engine were coming to an end. So rather than put on new tires, they just set it on a machine and just kind of smoothed it out a little bit, or a truing machine. So that's what they did. All right, well, we got another group coming up here, so let's move on down. Here's the firebox right here. Now directly up above are 2 dynamos. You'll see a rope running through them. That's the rope that goes up to the bell. Well, those dynamos make the electricity for the engine, and they're powered by steam. They each have their own little smokestack that steam shoots out of when they're running. And all they're making electricity for is the headlight. There's a cab light and a rear light, but we have added a bunch of electrical devices, like we have a radio and a bunch of modern technology we had to put on the engine, and so that it powers that. But these guys got backups for the backups. Under this little door here is a generator. We got a generator and a battery here. We also have this little silver canister right here. Is a water tester. And we can test the water that's in the boiler to make sure the chemical makeup is right. Now, back in the day when this engine was running to LA, that desert water was pretty pukey. It was awful. It was hard water, and it was really hard on the boiler and on the system.
Really?
They're air lines. Yeah, they're air lines for the air brakes for the cars in the train. Okay, so the thing about this engine is that we've run it 2 times down to the brewery, which is only 4 blocks. We ran it all the way to downtown to the rail yards, which is about almost 3 miles. That's the most we've run it, because to go out on the main line and actually run the main line, we got to get the permission from the New Mexico Department of Transportation, which owns the tracks right here, and then the BNSF. So the BNSF tells us, if you're going to run this on our line, you have to have a backup engine in case your big old steam engine fails. Well, we don't have another engine laying around here, so we're going to have to lease one from either Amtrak or BNSF or maybe Rail Runner. Somebody's got to give us a diesel engine, which needs to be plugged in to the steam engine. And that's what these are for. There's one on each side. They'll plug in the diesel engine here, and the engineer up front will run the whole show from up front. He'll run the diesel engine also. And I'll show you that in a little bit, how he does that. All right, it's a little bit tough getting up in here because you kind of climb right up the side of the engine, but there's grab irons here that you can use to pull yourself up. And if I can make it, I know you guys can. You're gonna stay down?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So here we're in the cab, and the fireman sits over here, and he is in charge of the fire. Okay. And what's your first name? What? Okay. He's sitting in the engineer's seat. Okay. Show us the brake stand. You know what the brake stand is? Which, yeah, it's that one. Yeah.
Oh, that's brakes.
Yeah, and there's two different handles there. One of the handles runs the brakes on the engine, and to run that, the air squeezes the brakes down on the wheels on the engine. But the other handle is for the cars of the train, and that works just the opposite. On the cars of the train, the air is holding the brakes open. Now, that's a safety feature. George Westinghouse invented that. That's how old that system is. And the way that works is, all right, let's say we're putting down the track and the bridge is washed out. And the engineer slams on the brakes, okay, on the engine, but the engine goes off in the creek. Well, that'll break the airline in two, right? So once the cars of the train lose their air, the brakes just automatically set up. So it's a safety feature. So the passengers are saved. Well, maybe in a fictional situation, they're saved. So the engineer's sitting over here and he's running those brakes, and he's running the throttle, which has the red handle right here. He can set the throttle, see those ratchets up there? He can set it at any speed he wants to go, and then he can look out the window. Notice the engineer's window is only about this big. They can't hardly see anything. So the fireman and the engineer had to help each other out with what was coming up on the tracks. Now, I told you that the engineer could run the diesel engine. Well, this is the diesel engine control. And it's kind of like a game. That's reverse, that's neutral, that's forward. There's the speed. That's all there is to it. And that's how he runs the diesel engine. This is part of the positive train control system that we had to put on this engine according to the Federal Railroad Administration. We started restoring this engine. They said you have to have PTC. Well, that's crazy. They didn't have PTC back in steam engine days. So we got together with the big boy guys up in Cheyenne and the Grand Canyon Railroad guys, and they put their heads together and they came up with a system for the steam engine. And the FRA said, we'll approve this. It's good, we'll approve it. So what it is if there's an emergency, dispatcher can send a signal to this box, and it literally will start to set up the brakes on this train and start to slow it down. The engineer still has to shut down the throttle. That's the one thing they couldn't figure out a computer way to do that. So the engineer still has to do that. But they approved it, so they got a patent on it. The reverse handle is way back over there. And that's how you go forward or reverse. Now I want to point out some interesting gauges. This is a rare gauge right here. It's double-sided, so the fireman and the engineer can both see it. Now up there are water level gauges. Now there's no water in the engine right now. After we get done running it, we drain it right away so we don't get rust. But there's the water level gauges. About halfway up, you should be able to see water in those gauges when there's water in the boiler. And they have to watch that very closely. Now this is the firebox. This whole thing is the firebox, and it's gigantic. You could crawl in there and stand up with no problem. It's, it's huge inside of there. Now, they told us that when they made the first engine in Philadelphia, they opened up the firebox.
Looks heavy.
It's really heavy. They opened up the firebox and they crawled in and they had a board meeting. Well, I didn't believe it. I thought it was a railroad fable. Some guy came in one day and brought a picture that was taken inside the firebox of all the guys in their suits having a meeting. Obviously, they hadn't started the engine up yet. They wouldn't have been in suits, let me tell you, because that gets real sooty in there. That's where the fire is. You can see some of the fire brick. So let's say we're going to start this engine up. All right. So the engineer tells the fireman, get her going. So the fireman starts the oil with this lever right here. The oil comes out of the tender under the floor through a pipe and it goes down kind of like a waterfall down into there. And then he turns on the oxygen. The oxygen comes up through here from down below. It's got to have lots of air for it to run. And the fireman looks in there and he goes, we're getting a nice little pool of oil in there. Here's where it gets real technical now. Takes an oily rag.
Oh my gosh.
Takes a match. Lights the oily rag. Throws it in there. And the fire starts burning. Okay? But it's slow. It's thick oil. So now, it's getting hot. Gotta close this up. And there's a great big giant bolt on here and they bolt it down. And there's a reason for that. It gets a little crazy in there. It's getting hotter. It's getting hotter. Gets up to 450 degrees. You finally have enough steam to start moving. That takes 5.5 hours.
Once the fire starts?
To heat all that water.
Just to start moving.
Just to start moving. So now we're going to start moving. We're going to go down the track and we need more power. So the fireman turns on the atomizer right here. He cranks this open. And this is really crazy to me, but where that oil is trickling down in there, there's some steam jets sitting right behind it. The steam shoots into that oil and makes a big cloud spray of oil, and it just explodes with furious heat and power. Now our firebox is roaring. So if you climbed up in here right now and that was going, this would be roaring, and it would be getting really hot up here, okay? So now they're going down the track, and sometimes the oil spray is going in there so fast, fireman gets a little carried away. It's going in there so fast that it doesn't ignite right away. And it'll shoot all the way to the front of the firebox. Then it hits the fire brick. And when it hits the fire brick, that fire brick is already about 500 degrees or hotter. It explodes. And then you have kaboom! And it shoots backwards. And that's why this door has a big bolt on it, because it would blow this door open. All right, so it gets really, it would be a little toasty up here. So the top of the firebox gets up to 1,000 degrees. Now, I told you about the water level gauges. If that water drops and the top of the firebox goes dry, it will start to melt. And if it starts to melt and then the steam goes in, you have a catastrophic explosion that'll blow this thing in a million pieces. And you won't even know it's an engine. The crew guys are killed instantly because they're scalded to death. So there's nothing left of anything up here.
Did that ever happen?
That happened once in a while. Oh. Yeah. I worked in Marysville, Kansas, and they had a crew. They had Kansas City crews that would run trains from Kansas City to Marysville, and then they go back home on another train. And they were 13 miles out of town, and they said, we're getting low on water, but they told the dispatcher we're going to try to make it. They didn't make it. It exploded. And there's a picture, and all it is there's wheels sitting on the track. And where the boiler was, it looks like spaghetti. The tubes are like that. And the cab is gone.
How long ago was that?
That was in the early 1940s. Early 1940s, yeah. So, now, I got a question for you. This engine has 5,400 plus horsepower. It's really super powerful. It has 83-inch driver wheels. It has a giant whistle that you can hear a mile in every direction. Actually, you can hear about 3 miles. Okay, it pulled the most famous Santa Fe passenger trains all by itself. What was the running speed of this engine?
About 90.
You're right. This engine ran 90 to 100 miles an hour. All right, 544,000 pounds or 944,000 pounds going 900 miles an hour down the track. So that's why they had a really loud whistle. Not only did you see it coming and hear it coming, you could feel it coming because this thing shook everything. Now, when we started fixing this engine up, some old firemen showed up that were firemen on this engine. They would have sat right here. And they told us that on some of their runs, they would get out west of Albuquerque heading for LA. And there's some big, long, straight stretches of track there in Arizona around Winslow, Holbrook, and that area. They would open it up if they were running late. The engineer would tell them, open it wide up. So the fireman would really have this atomizer going. Then he'd scoop up sand out of that little box right behind you, and he'd come over here with his little scoop, and he'd put his scoop right here and suck that sand right in there. And that sand is flying all around in there, and what is it doing? It's cleaning the soot off the tubes, which makes the thing run even hotter. Then the engineer opens up the chimney, and he shoots the chimney up 4 feet in the air to make even more draw through the engine. And the fireman said that they were doing 120 miles an hour with this train. That's hard to believe, 120 miles an hour. Anyway, if you ever see pictures or in movies or TV shows where there's lots of black smoke coming out of the engine, it's supposed to run really clean. You're really not supposed to see a lot of smoke. But when you see that black smoke, that's what they're doing. They're throwing sand in and they're cleaning out the soot. That's that soot and stuff blowing out the top. So here's a little wheel right here. Anybody want to take a guess at what this little wheel does?
Does that actually scrape off sand on the side?
No. It runs the speedometer.
Oh.
All right, let's head on down here. I'll point out the automatic oiling system. Now in the 1920s, the engineer and the fireman would have jumped out and they would have run around with an oil can and tried to oil all these different locations that need oil. But this thing is just too massive for that. So we had the Nathan automatic oiler. And it was powered by steam, and it lubricated dozens of locations while the steam engine was running. But when we pull it out of the barn and the engine is not running,
Don't mind me.
where are you hitting?
Getting the valve open.
Getting the valve. Okay, so we have these little oilers right here that we turn on when we pull the engine out of the barn. All right. A baggage car. So all your long distance trains would have had a baggage car or two on it. So when you got on the train in Albuquerque and you had 10 bags, no problem. The bags went to the baggage car and then they unloaded them in LA. You can't do that on the plane now. So it was used by Amtrak, then it went to a private owner in Ohio. Okay. Then, I don't know, he got tired of it or decided not to do anything with it, so he gave it back to us. So we got it back, and he even gave us some money to fix up the brakes, because all the brake rigging had to be redone and everything. We still had to spend thousands of dollars on it. So after we spent several $1,000s and hired the NS Railroad to pull it to Chicago and the BNSF to pull it down to here, we got our free car. All right, now, like when we got it. Pretty hopeless looking. When I look at this, I think, what were they thinking, trying to fix this up? But they went to the mayor. They were going to have to move it because of the interstate construction. The mayor was going to scrap it, turn it into Ford Pintos or something. I don't know. But the group wanted to save it, and he didn't want to. They said, but Mayor, there's asbestos coming out all over the place here, and the little kids are climbing all over it. The mayor's like, oh no. He goes, okay, fine, I'll sell it to you for $1. Now, get it out of my park right now. And they had to get it out of the park right away. So they brought a bulldozer, and they took a piece of track. You know, on model railroads, you have the little pieces of track you stick together. Well, they do the same thing on the real railroad. They have these track panels already made. They laid one in front of the engine, tried to pull it, couldn't do it. Had to get another bulldozer. So they pull in the engine. They just kept moving the track, trying to get over to a railroad line, put it on. And they got to an intersection, and they had to do a 90-degree turn with that massive locomotive. How are we going to do that? So a guy goes, we need a truckload of sand. And they ordered a truckload of sand, and they dumped the sand right in the middle of the intersection and spread it out. And they laid the track up over on the sand. They pulled the engine up onto the sand track, and it spun just perfect. That sand allowed that track to spin 90 degrees. And then they headed on down the street until they got to a track. Then it went into storage for 2 years on a siding until we found this place. And this has been our home for about 20-some years, right here. So this is actually BIA property and Bureau of Indian Affairs property that we rent from them. So we have other pictures here. We started with the tender first, and we restored it first. I noticed how shiny the paint was. That thing was painted in 2017, and it's just like a mirror. It's an excellent paint job on it. But here's where they took the oil tank out, and boy, did they have a mess. The Santa Fe left this much oil in the bottom of the tank, and it turned into tar. Then, on all those baffle walls in there, was hard water deposits. So a whole crew of guys had to go down in there with oxygen tubes so they could breathe, and they took chisels and hammers and chiseled off all that hard water deposits. They took out several thousand pounds of hard water deposits. But it's like, the tender's like brand new now. And then here, you saw in the firebox, which you couldn't see real well, this is what it looks like inside that firebox. Here is after they put the new brick in. You notice here all these little squares? They had to ultrasound every square inch of the firebox. And if the metal wasn't thick enough, they had to add metal to it. They also had to change out some of these bolts that had rusted away. So everything had to be redone. Now, those tubes that run back and forth through the locomotive, they were rusty. FRA says they all got to come out. You got to cut them out and put in new ones. After they cut them all out, this is what it looked like in there. How did they do that? They went in through the headlight. The headlight's mounted on a door. That door is mounted on a bigger door. So they opened the whole front of the locomotive up, and this is how they hauled out all the old tubes. And here they put in the new tubes. Now I told you about lighting the wheels on fire. I wasn't kidding. They really did do that. You can actually look this up on YouTube. Just look up changing a tire on a steam engine, and you'll find a YouTube video that shows this, how they did it. Now you remember I told you about the steam going from wet steam to dry steam, where it got so hot it went out up to 700 degrees. Well, this is the place where that happens. This is right up in the front of the engine. This is where it turns into the dry steam, and these are the superheaters that help it get to that temperature. Now, another thing you would see if you opened up that big door on the front of the engine, you would see the base of the chimney. Now, And I told you about the fireman lighting the fire. I kind of left out one of the little steps there. And when he lights that fire, well, one thing he doesn't want the smoke to come back up in his face. He wants the smoke to go up the chimney. So he does a little priming. Turns on the air. Air goes through this tube and into this donut, which is at the base of the chimney, and it shoots air straight up the chimney. That's all it really took. You get that to going.
Like a damp or something?
Yeah, kind of like priming a pump. You get that to going, and then when he started the fire in the firebox, the smoke went up like it's supposed to. Now, over there's our metal shops where we make all kinds of interesting